army of kids who somehow made Depression-era America laugh harder than anything else in theaters. For nearly 2 decades, the Our Gang shorts, later beloved as the Little Rascals, turned unknown children into some of the most recognizable faces in the country. But cameras stop rolling, and childhood fame has a way of turning into a very different kind of story once the lights go out. Behind the muddy overalls, the crooked derby hats, and the gap-toothed smiles was a group of kids who grew into adults carrying real burdens: poverty, addiction, violence, illness, and the impossible task of outrunning a character the whole world thought they already knew. Today, we're going back to look at what really happened to the kids of Our Gang, from their first days in front of Hal Roach's cameras to their final chapters. Some found peace. Some found tragedy. All of them left something behind. Carl Switzer was born on August 7, 1927, in Paris, Illinois. As the story goes, he and his older brother, Harold, were visiting relatives in California when their mother brought them to the Hal Roach Studios lot. The boys started singing in the studio cafeteria, hoping someone might notice. And someone did. Both brothers were signed on the spot, and by 1935 Carl had become Alfalfa, the squawking, cowlicked, hopelessly earnest romantic of the group. His off-key serenades to Darla and his rivalry with Spanky made him one of the most popular characters in the entire series, arguably eclipsing even Spanky himself by the late 1930s. Fame did not carry cleanly into adulthood. As Switzer grew older and lost the boyish look that made Alfalfa work, the film offers dried up. He picked up small parts in bigger productions, a brief appearance in It's a Wonderful Life, a bit part in The Court Jester, but nothing that matched his childhood stardom. He married Diantha Collingwood in 1954 and had a son, but the marriage didn't last. To pay the bills, Switzer worked as a bartender, a dog trainer, and a hunting guide for well-known clients. He had also developed a reputation for a short temper and a habit of trading on his old fame in increasingly desperate ways. In January 1959, Switzer had been training a hunting dog belonging to his friend and occasional business partner, Moses Bud Stilts. The dog got loose during a trip and went missing. A rancher eventually found it and wanted a reward, so Switzer covered the cost out of his own pocket, expecting Stilts to pay him back. Stilts refused. The dispute festered for weeks over what amounted to $50. On the night of January 21, 1959, Switzer and a friend, actor Jack Pyatt, drove to Stilts' home in Mission Hills, California, to demand the money. What happened next has never been fully agreed upon. By every account, a violent struggle broke out inside the house. Stilts was struck in the head with a glass clock, and at some point Stilts produced a revolver. In the fight over the gun, Switzer was shot in the abdomen. He died before reaching the hospital, at the age of 31. A coroner's inquest ruled the shooting justifiable homicide, but Stilts' own stepson later said publicly that he believed it was closer to murder than self-defense. Switzer was buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, his headstone engraved with the image of a hunting dog, a strange, quiet echo of the very dispute that ended his life. George McFarland was born on October 2, 1928, in Dallas, Texas, and joined Our Gang at just 3 years old. As Spanky, he became the bossy, quick-tongued, unofficial leader of the group, a character so central to the franchise that later shorts were built directly around him. Unlike many of his co-stars, McFarland actually managed a relatively stable adult life. He married twice, first to Paula Jean Wilkinson, and later to Doris Lee Liner, with whom he had 3 children, and settled into a long career far removed from Hollywood, working for years in food service management and later in sales. McFarland never entirely escaped being Spanky, and by his own admission, he grew tired of being introduced that way for the rest of his life. Still, he leaned into his history in his later years, becoming a fixture at nostalgia conventions and Our Gang reunions, where fans lined up for autographs from a man in his 60s who still had the same sly grin from 1934. George McFarland died on June 30, 1993, of a heart attack at his home in Grapevine, Texas, at the age of 64. He remains one of the few original Rascals who lived what most would call a full, ordinary life after the camera stopped. Billy Thomas was born on March 12, 1931, in Los Angeles, California, and stepped into the role of Buckwheat at just 3 years old, quickly becoming one of the most recognized child performers in the country. Off camera, Thomas was reportedly a far cry from his on-screen character. Quiet, easygoing, and, according to those who knew him, uninterested in chasing continued stardom once the series ended. After Our Gang wound down, Thomas made a clean and deliberate break from acting. Rather than clinging to Hollywood, he went to work behind the scenes in the film industry itself, spending decades as a film lab technician for Technicolor. He married and had a son, living a private, largely unremarkable adult life outside the spotlight, which, given what happened to several of his castmates, may have been its own kind of survival strategy. In the summer of 1980, Thomas appeared at a well-attended Our Gang reunion event and received a standing ovation that reportedly moved him to tears. Only 10 weeks later, on October 10, 1980, Billy Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack at his Los Angeles home. He was 49 years old. His castmates said the timing felt almost unbearably cruel, that after decades of staying out of the limelight, he'd only just allowed himself to step back into it before he was gone. Matthew Beard was born on January 1, 1925, near Los Angeles, and joined Our Gang at age 5 as Stymie, instantly recognizable in his oversized derby hat. Stymie's calm, streetwise wit made him stand out, but Beard's home life carried heavy pressure. His income helped support a large family, and expectations followed him well into his teenage years. As the film roles disappeared, Beard's life took a dark turn. He drifted into addiction as a teenager, eventually developing a serious heroin dependency that led to repeated arrests and stretches in and out of jail. It was a stunning fall for someone who had once been one of the most famous children in America. Beard eventually entered Synanon, a residential program for addiction recovery, and by most accounts genuinely turned his life around. He got clean, and in the years that followed he rebuilt a modest acting career, taking small roles in television shows like Sanford & Son and Good Times, and appearing in 1978's The Buddy Holly Story. In January 1981, just 2 days after his 56th birthday, Beard suffered a stroke and a serious fall. He died days later, on January 8, 1981, from complications related to his injuries. He was buried in Los Angeles, remembered as much for the addiction he survived for years as for the fame he'd found as a child. Darla Hood was born on November 8, 1931, in Lee Day, Oklahoma, and was only 4 years old when she was cast as the sweet, dimpled centerpiece of the boys' affections in Our Gang. Her singing voice and easy charm, especially her on-screen chemistry with Alfalfa, became one of the defining threads of the series for years. As an adult, Hood built a genuinely successful career as a nightclub and studio singer, performing at venues like the Copacabana and the Sahara, and voicing well-known commercial jingles, including the mermaid in the Chicken of the Sea ads. She married twice, first to singer Robert Decker, and later to record executive Jose Grandson, with whom she had 3 children. In mid-1979, while helping organize an upcoming Our Gang cast reunion, Hood was admitted to a hospital for what should have been a routine appendectomy. The surgery itself went fine, but the blood she received during a transfusion was later found to have been contaminated with hepatitis. The infection triggered fatal heart failure, and Darla Hood died on June 13, 1979, at just 47 years old. It was a death that stunned her former castmates precisely because it had nothing to do with fame, addiction, or hard living. Just devastating bad luck during a minor medical procedure. Billy Thomas, hearing the news, said he was heartbroken. He would be dead himself little more than a year later. Norman Chaney was born on October 18, 1914, in Cambridge, Maryland, and joined the cast in 1929 at 14, noticeably older than most of his co-stars, playing the good-natured, slow-burning Chubby. His size and comic timing made him an audience favorite almost immediately, but it also meant his entire career was tied to his body in a way none of the other kids experienced. Not long after leaving the series, Chaney began gaining weight rapidly and inexplicably, eventually exceeding 300 pounds despite standing well under 5 feet tall. Doctors eventually diagnosed a glandular disorder, and in 1935 he underwent treatment at Johns Hopkins that caused a drastic and dangerous drop in his weight. The strain on his body proved too much. Norman Chaney died on May 29, 1936, of myocarditis, inflammation of the heart, at only 21 years old. He was buried in Baltimore, but his family couldn't afford a headstone, and his grave sat unmarked for 76 years. It wasn't until 2012 that a community fundraising effort finally placed markers for both Chaney and his mother, a quiet, decades-late act of remembrance for one of the youngest rascals to die. Jackie Cooper was born on September 15, 1922, in Los Angeles, and joined our gang at age 7, quickly establishing himself as one of the most naturally gifted child performers Hollywood had ever seen. His talent for real, unforced emotion on camera made him a star well beyond the Rascal shorts. He'd go on to an Oscar nomination at age 9 for Skippy in 1931, becoming, and remaining for decades, the youngest Best Actor nominee in Academy history. Cooper later spoke candidly about the manipulative tactics used on him as a child, most famously recalling how director Norman Torog, filming Skippy, told him his dog had been shot in order to force real tears for a scene, a trick that worked. But